Zelensky for saying Ukraine would not recognize the Crimean Peninsula as Russian territory. Trump went on to call the situation dire for Ukraine while adding the United States, Ukraine, and Russia are very close to a deal and, quote, the man with no cards to play should now finally get it done. It's painful. Hours after the president spoke about the negotiations and was asked directly if the deal on the table includes officially recognizing the Crimean Peninsula as Russian territory.
I will say that I think Russia is ready, and a lot of people said Russia wanted to go for the whole thing. And I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far it's been harder, but that's okay. It's all right. But I think we have a deal with both.
And if I may, this deal that you have with Russia, does it include recognizing Russia's sovereignty over Crimea?
Well, everything is good. Look, I just want to see the war end. I don't care. If they're both happy, they both sign an agreement. I have no favorites. I don't want to have any favorites. I want to have a deal done.
More on those remarks in a moment. They followed a series of developments in peace talks that began with the announcement that Secretary of State Marco Rubio would not attend what were supposed to be high-level meetings in London with European negotiating teams. Instead, Trump's envoy for Ukraine and Russia, retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, met with Ukrainian officials. Those Ukrainian officials met separately with teams from the UK, Germany, and France. Tomorrow, presidential envoy Steve Witkoff is set to meet with Vladimir Putin for the fourth time. All of this comes as Russia continues to bombard Ukrainian cities. 9 people were killed in the capital of Kyiv overnight, and more than 70 were injured by a massive Russian missile and drone strike. So, Jonathan Lemire, obviously Russia, Vladimir Putin emboldened by having a new president who they view as very favorable to his approach here and his war aims. But if you go back to what President Trump said, again, explicitly attacking our ally, attacking President Zelensky, and again, putting all of the burden, all of the onus on the victim of this invasion 3 years ago, where does this go from here? Are they setting a pretext to walk away completely from all of this? Because if you look at what we've had reported out from this apparent peace deal, it gives everything Russia could have ever wanted when it started this war.
Let's start right there. The White House, the Trump administration, has asked Russia to give up nothing. There's been no compromise, no concession requested from the Trump team. He has a number of times even blamed Zelensky for the start of this war, which is preposterous. There's a sovereign nation. Russia invaded in February of 2022. We know from Marco Rubio last week saying that the United States might be willing to walk away from peace talks if a deal can't get done soon. We had J.D. Vance yesterday, sort of while overseas, spelling out, and we'll get into the details in a moment, but conditions for a ceasefire, for peace, which would involve Ukraine giving up Crimea. And that's the sticking point right now. This is the Ukrainians are simply not going to recognize Russian territory. Now, there's going to be dispute over it. There's certainly been sense, even while President Biden was in office, whether Ukraine really had the ability to retake Crimea. But that is simply not going to be, you don't start the negotiations there. And that's where the Trump team seems to want. Which is such a huge concession from Zelensky, also having to say we'll never join NATO while asking nothing of Russia, continuing to fawn in many ways, as Witkoff has done, over Vladimir Putin, siding with Moscow day in, day out in this conflict.
And Lemire, as you mentioned, while traveling in India yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance repeated the administration's warning about the U.S. walking away from negotiations between Russia and Ukraine if a deal isn't reached soon.
Well, I'm going to echo something Secretary Rubio said, which is, look, we've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal.
All right, and before we get to our experts, tell me what you're thinking right now.
I mean, even as the vice president said there, he said we're trying to understand each side's perspective. Trying to understand the Russia's perspective. We know what their perspective is. They invaded a sovereign nation.
They want to seize territory, and Trump wants to give it to them.
Yeah, that
is the bottom line.
Doesn't seem much up for interpretation.
And we'll talk more about the situation in Ukraine after a quick break. Also ahead, a live interview with the Senate's second-ranking Democrat, Dick Durbin. He's retiring after 44 years in Congress, and he joins our conversation straight ahead on Morning Joe. Current offer looks more like an ultimatum than grounds for a durable peace. Mr. Trump is angry that Ukraine won't accept a deal that legitimizes Russia's occupation of Crimea, as if this is a minor map revision. The U.S. refusal to credit territory seized by invasion is a principle intended to deter future marauders. Letting Russia keep its navy in Crimea is a threat to Europe as much as to Ukraine. A peace or even an armistice worth the name requires compromise on both sides. But Mr. Trump has applied pressure only on Ukraine. Mr. Trump likes to say Ukraine doesn't have the cards, but it does have one ace. The president won't be able to abandon Ukraine without paying a heavy political price. Mr. Trump can still salvage a deal in Ukraine, but the current final settlement offer looks like it would set up Mr. Putin to win the war now or later. The world's rogues will notice, and Mr. Trump's headaches will have only begun, Willie.
You know, the New York Times reminds us this morning that now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, then Senator Rubio, just 3 years ago, co-sponsored legislation, an amendment to prohibit the United States from ever recognizing any Russian claim over parts of Ukraine that has seized, which includes Crimea. It's saying exactly what the Wall Street Journal just said. It sets a terrible precedent. China's watching, Taiwan is watching, on and on. Let's bring in staff writer at The Atlantic, Ann Applebaum, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO Policy, Ian Brzezinski. Good morning to you both. Ian, I'll start with you and just read a quote from President Zelensky in reaction to this apparent proposal, this peace deal, as the United States is calling it. Quote, "There is nothing to talk about." That's from President Zelensky. So where do you see us going from here?
Thanks. You know, let me put this in historical context. I mean, what we see President Trump doing is basically forcing Europe and Ukraine to make concessions of territory and sovereignty of the likes that we haven't seen since the 1938 Munich Agreement, when Neville Chamberlain forced Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland to Hitler, an agreement that unleashed the violence of World War II. It's something we haven't seen since the Yalta Accord, an accord that enabled Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin to impose a sphere of influence over Central and Eastern Europe, a domination that lasted for 5 decades. And the tragedy of this is it's totally unnecessary, because Trump likes to say he has all the cards. And in fact, the transatlantic community, led by the United States, does have all the cards. We have some $55 trillion in GDP among NATO nations. That's about half of the world's GDP against Russia's $2 trillion. The alliance spends about $1.5 trillion on defense annually against Russia's $200 billion. That's a factor of 10. It's amazing that the West, led by Trump, isn't forcing or enabling Ukraine to end this war on its terms. And it's a tragedy. You know, Biden failed to leverage that power against Putin. But Trump is even weaker than Biden. Not only is he forcing Ukraine into concessions, he's setting up dynamics that history has taught us will set up the pretext for a wider and more dangerous war. So Trump is not leveraging American power very effectively. He's proving weak, and he's undermining not just Ukraine, but our own interests in having enduring peace and stability in Europe.
So, Ann, if we're reaching back to Neville Chamberlain, reaching back to Yalta, not a good sign, obviously. I'm curious what you make of what we've seen just in the last 24 hours, the statements from the president, Secretary of State Marco Rubio declining to show up for those negotiations in London, all against the backdrop of the enduring question of more than a decade, which is why? Why does President Trump, why does he always, as a reflex, side with Vladimir Putin and Russia?
So I'll start by saying, agreeing with Ian to say that Putin has never given up his main goal in Ukraine. His goal is to remove Ukrainian sovereignty, to change the nature of the Ukrainian government, to make sure that Ukraine does not ever integrate with Europe, to make sure that it stays inside some kind of Russian sphere of influence, preferably, maybe even sharing sovereignty with Russia. So he has never, ever said that he has given that up. Sometimes he'll change his language a little bit, but he maintains that all the time. And so even in all these negotiations, they keep talking about how they've been talking and talking, and they're tired of the negotiations and so on. They've never ever put any pressure on Russia to change it. And you're right to ask why is it that Trump continues to support this? And the only answer I can see is that Trump admires people who have unlimited power. He admires people who don't have checks and balances. He admires people who simply exercise violence, who use it without restraint. He sees that Putin does that, and he admires it.
Coming up, our next guest says Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is deeply out of his depth. Congressman Jim Himes, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, joins our conversation straight ahead.
Hose. It kinks, splits, and it always leaks. And it's way too heavy to carry around. It's time to get the brand new pocket hose Copperhead. Just turn on the water and watch it grow to a full-size hose. It stretches and expands like a rubber band. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the new pocket pivot swivels 360 degrees. Just connect to the spigot and watch it pivot. And when you turn off the water, away it goes, shrinking back to a pocket-size hose. And it makes it easy to carry and put away. Copperhead. It's the hose that grows and pivots, flexes, and sprays. It puts itself away for another day. The pocket hose is so unique and so innovative, it was awarded over 100 patents. Call or go online.
What more can you tell us here?
Well, the Iranians, both on the governmental level and on a popular level, are taking these talks extraordinarily seriously. In the U.S., they might not be getting a lot of attention. People are talking about Ukraine, the economy, the executive orders that President Trump is giving. But here, the only conversation that people are having is focused on these talks. People hope that they will be successful. People hope that they will end sanctions. And a lot of people are worried that if they fail, that there could be some sort of military action taken against Iran by Israel and the United States together. And I think just the fact that I am here is part of that initiative. The government is trying to open up. We've been given quite extraordinary access to government officials. I was at the Iranian parliament the other day talking to a ranking member of their National Security Committee. We've been able to walk around the streets without any kind of minders or escorts. A lot is happening here. There is a lot of change happening inside Iran that doesn't get out. A lot of these stereotypes people have about the Iranian people. They're not what you see when you walk around on the streets here. There is a sophisticated culture that is that very much wants to engage with the world. You go to a coffee shop in Tehran, and not just in the wealthy areas, but anywhere in this city, and in many places it looks like you could be in a coffee shop in New York City or any part of Western Europe. The problem is, because of the sanctions, because of the impositions imposed on Iran, they are almost cut off from the world. They can't trade. They can't engage in any real cultural exchanges. People here can't travel easily outside the country. The other day I went to a technology park full of young entrepreneurs. They're calling it Tehran's Silicon Valley, and they're working on programming, they're working on AI, but it is all at this stage for domestic use, and they want to break out of this sanctions box and engage with the world, and they're hoping that these negotiations will allow them to do that. But they could fall apart. The talks are centered on Iran's nuclear program, and Iran says, and has consistently says, it is willing to allow in more inspectors. It is willing to get rid of some of its highly enriched uranium. It says it doesn't want to have a nuclear bomb, and it is willing to allow people to come in and check that and prove that, but it does not want to give up its civilian nuclear program. It doesn't want to give up the potential to make nuclear power, create radioactive isotopes, and that is the real sticking point, because Israel, some in the United States say as long as Iran has any kind of nuclear program and has the capacity to enrich uranium, even at a low level, that it could accelerate that and create weapons-grade uranium. So the Iranian people, the Iranian government want this deal to happen, but there is still a decent chance that it falls apart over this enrichment issue.
NBC's Richard Engel reporting for us from Iran this morning. Richard, thanks as always. Coming up,
Whether you're relocating or renovating, save up to 30%.
Out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, the first time in history flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
Okay. Have you talked to Mexico about this today?
And that was President Donald Trump earlier this year signing a proclamation designating February 9th Gulf of America Day, as Air Force One flew over that newly renamed body of water. The drama surrounding the president's decision to rename the Gulf of Mexico and his newfound partnership with the president of El Salvador have led to increased tensions between North and South America. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Greg Grandin explores the history of the Americas in his latest book, America, America, A New History of the New World. The book looks at the history of the two continents through a new lens and argues much of what happens in the North is directly linked to the South. And Greg joins us now. Greg, good to see you. Congratulations on the book. Let's start in the present day. There's a lot of course, fight over the terminology there, Gulf of America. Some news outlets refuse to use that nomenclature. And then we have seen this partnership with the president of El Salvador, where he's now even suggesting that American citizens could be sent to the prisons there. Talk to us about how this is representative of the big brother, little brother, in some ways, relationship between the Americas.
Yeah, well, the United States and Latin America have had a long relationship going back centuries, and before that it was the tension between the Spanish Empire and the British Empire. But to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America is really an argument within Donald Trump's own head, because Latin Americans themselves understand themselves as Americans, hence the title of the book, America, America, right? And so it's not particularly, I mean, obviously it's a little obnoxious to unilaterally rename the Gulf of Mexico, which has been called since the 1500s, the Gulf of America. But all you have to do is put an accent on it and everybody would be happy.
So this is, there have been, obviously in recent decades, foreign policy from the United States towards Latin America, has been very aggressive at times, bellicose. Other times, it feels like it's sort of ignored it. Whether it's Mexico or further south, people are just sort of vilified as, hey, they're just migrants trying to cross the border, as opposed to being respected for who they are themselves. How long has sort of that phenomenon been in existence?
Well, the border was wide open throughout the 19th century, throughout the early. Well, it wasn't until around World War I that they began to enforce any kind of limits on who could cross. Seasonal migrants came over and came back and forth across. There's long been a kind of nativist current within the United States, which I talk about in the book. But the border begins to harden with World War I, and then increasingly so through the 20th century. But it wasn't always that. If Trump's model president is McKinley, during McKinley's time, the border was, people went back and forth as if there was no border.
You know, we so often look as Americans to our Western European roots, that the founders had, and that, dominates basically the historical discourse of how America came to be. But actually, you argue that so much of American history came from the South. And can you tell us what we were given from the South and how it has influenced us to today?
Yeah. What the book specifically argues, America, is that the tension between Latin America and the United States creates much of what we think of as the modern world. The liberal international order that Donald Trump is currently undermining was created out of that tension in the New World. So that's the main argument, that it was in the Americas that we can understand the founding of the United Nations. And the reason for that is the United States comes into the world a single nation on a continent that they imagined to be empty. And of course it wasn't. Spain was there, eventually Mexico, Native Americans. Latin Americans came into the world already a League of Nations, 7 nations all together. They had to learn how to live with each other. And pretty much all of the principles that go to underwrite first the League of Nations and then the United Nations were pretty much present in the 1820s when Latin America was organized as a community of nations. That's the main argument. That's of the book.
The book shines new light on historical figures like Simon Bolivar, Woodrow Wilson, and the like. But we want to get you on a more modern person, the Pope Francis, lying in state currently in the Vatican. In fact, we have some live images here of some of those well-wishers, mourners filing past. You say that this Pope, of course, our first Latin American Pope, is really representative of that region's sort of progressive tradition. Tell us about that.
Well, he came of age under Juan Perón in Argentina, when poorer classes, when the working class was entering the public realm, when the state was expanding its social capacity and extending social rights, education, and health care, and that's what he emerged as. That's the milieu in which he grew up in, and of course he was the head of the Jesuits during that country's anti-communist period, the military period, where 30,000 people were disappeared, and he was all caught up in that. Some people, there's kind of a little bit of a murky history of where he stood. But the point is, he comes out of this tradition that he's as much of a Latin American as he is a Catholic. In some ways, you can't really separate those two things. The sociality of Latin America and is very much condensed in his being and his humanism. And one of the arguments of the book is that the strong current of kind of humanistic, universal democracy. Latin America is famous for having a little problem with democratic stability when it comes to institutions, when it comes to coups and regime change. But in terms of the democratic spirit, Latin America it's quite a remarkable place in the courage that individuals constantly fighting for democracy. And it was, a big part of the book is Latin America during World War II. It was indispensable for the United States in defeating fascism. And when FDR took the world to war in 1941, he wasn't just rallying the United States, he rallied the whole continent. He understood it as a continental war that he was fighting.
The fascinating new book, America, A New History of the New World. Historian Greg Granin. Greg, congratulations on the book, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up here on Morning Joe, Emmy Award-winning actor Michael Chiklis and the CEO of the Creative Coalition, Robin Bronk, join us. Will hold its Right to Bear Arts dinner tomorrow night in Washington, D.C. to rally support for the National Endowment for the Arts. The annual event brings together lawmakers and Hollywood to celebrate the arts and push for NEA funding to help support local artists and organizations across the country. Joining us now, Emmy Award-winning actor Michael Chiklis and CEO of the Creative Coalition, Robin Bronk. Our thanks to you both for joining us. Michael, I could spend this entire interview talking to you about our mutual hometown, Lowell, Massachusetts, but we'll set that aside. Wow. We'll set that aside for today. And let's talk about the importance of this effort, particularly now.
Well, particularly now, as you say, because funding for everything is being slashed. But it's not just this administration. It's every administration, it seems, when people are looking to make cuts, the arts are first on the block, as if it's something that's superfluous and extracurricular, and they don't realize the value add that the arts bring in so many areas. But for, there's all kinds of statistics like, for every dollar put into the arts, $9 are returned. But more than that, just in terms of the innovation and the imagination and the things that artists bring to any culture, it's so imperative. And people don't realize, that we're not just.
We're not just happy people.
Right, exactly. We're not just fun and games. It's something that, we inspire the imagination. And from that comes all manner of... You can't point to one civilization in the history of mankind that isn't marked by its arts and antiquities. And because we speak to the culture, what's happening in any place right now. And in the future, you'll look at our art and you'll see a snapshot of what was happening at that time.
I do think you're so right to bring up the idea that culture informs politics, politics informs culture. The fact that you're lobbying Congress on this, I think, is notable at this moment. But you've been here many times before, regularly trying to make the case to lawmakers. What's different about it now? What's the same?
Well, I will say that we have been here since the mid-'80s when it's not new. President Reagan was going to extinguish the NEA, and that's actually how the Creative Coalition was found. We were galvanized. There were a bunch of actors, Chris Reeve, who were just starting out, Ron Silver, Susan Sarandon, Blythe Danner, who realized that the president was going to zero it out and said, let's go to Washington and go door to door and let's bone up on the facts. And that's what they did. And they are credited with saving the NEA. And every year since then, interestingly enough, it hasn't come up to those levels of the 80s. But every year since then, every April, we come back to do the door knocking. I mean, we are doing a ground campaign here and talking about, people don't think the arts, if you don't care about the culture, they're transactional. As Michael said, for every dollar spent in a community, when the NEA gives a $10,000 grant in the community, it will come back at $90,000.
I see that you're wearing an Oura ring, right?
Guilty.
Right. I don't have it on now, but I also have an Apple Watch. And when I was a kid, an Apple Watch, that was a dream. That was something, Dick Tracy, right? Yeah. And that's what I mean about inspiration and innovation. That's something that we looked at the comics and thought, imagine that you could talk to someone on your watch. And that was a dream. And now it's a reality. And this is the kind of thing that is sparked by human imagination. If you just are all right brain or all left brain, there's just so much empirical evidence that says that when you employ both sides of your brain, there are better outcomes in every area.
We know that arts are used successfully with veterans, with PTSD program. We know that a kid who has arts in school has a better chance of employment, of going on.
When I was 14 years old, I helped to open a nonprofit equity theater in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it's called the Merrimack Repertory Theater. And I don't know, if not for that experience, I don't know what would have become of me.
I also think you said something to me when we were talking in the commercial break about the fact that no one that you talk to in Congress is against the arts. It's a question of the money.
It is. It's exactly it. It's interesting. No one is against the arts. It's not. It actually is not a red or
You're not
blue
making the case for, we should be protecting.
No, it's not red or blue at all.
Yes, most of our leaders love the arts. Our leaders understand the importance of it. It's just how the arts are going to be funded. I grew up in Clemson, South Carolina. There was one community theater. There was one theater.
Theater.
There was one theater and one community theater.
Harvard, no.
Harvard, no.
See the arts once again.
Yeah, it took us 30 seconds to say Pop or no.
You grew up there in community theater.
Yeah, so in community theater, and that was my lifeline. It gave me everything. It was Shakespeare. It was the classics. It taught me how to read better, how to be strategic, how to be on time, how to have discipline. And when I'm telling you, when you're in rural America,
Lowell, Massachusetts. The first show that we did was Romeo and Juliet, and I played Samson as a 14-year-old. Do you bite your thumb at me, sir? I do. The whole fight at the beginning of the show, and it just opened worlds to me.
Things you don't get to see.
Had no clue about.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
All roads lead to Lowell, John Lemire.
I have always said that. I have been to the Merrimack Repertory Theater. Such important work. We're so glad you're here to advocate it. Michael Chiklis and CEO of the Creative Coalition, Robin Brunk, our thanks to you both. Still ahead here on Morning Joe, the #2 senator in Democratic leadership. The other stories making headlines this morning, starting with California, which is now the 4th largest economy in the world. According to data from the IMF, the Golden State has a GDP of $4.1 trillion, which only trails the United States, China, and Germany. The recent data also found that California had an economic growth rate of 6%, higher than the 5.3% for the U.S. and China's 2.6%. To Texas now, where driverless trucks are set to hit the road later this month. Aurora Innovation says it plans to go completely driverless at the end of April, a key milestone that promises to reshape the trucking industry. The first route will be along a 200-mile stretch of I-45 between Dallas and Houston. Meanwhile, a man is now in custody for allegedly stealing 4 luxury cars from a hotel parking garage in Miami Beach, Florida. The thefts happened last year. Surveillance video, you're seeing it here, shows the suspect crawling his way into the valet key room in an effort to avoid detection. Police say he left with 4 key fobs, including one for a Rolls Royce. It's believed the suspect did have accomplices, but they have not yet been arrested. The thefts totaled nearly $2 million. And with the Stanley Cup playoffs underway, many hockey fans may have noticed something that sounds a bit different. The broadcast teams for some of the games are not actually on site. The Athletic reports that several first-round games on TNT are being called from a studio in Atlanta rather than the arenas themselves. The main reason, you can guess it, to save money. Calling a game on site, particularly in some of the smaller Canadian cities like Winnipeg that are hosting games right now, requires a significant financial investment. But not all NHL fans are happy, as the move has garnered a fair amount of online criticism. Let me add my voice to that criticism. Love the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's not the way to do it. Coming up here on Morning Joe, the latest on the Signal chat controversy. We'll dig in times of Connecticut, the top Democrat on the House in.
It's nice to know you're free to focus on what matters. With reliable Medicare coverage from United Healthcare.
There's no business like small business, like no business we know. We never sleep because we're busy dreaming.
Sleep? You gotta sleep.
When water from the pipes was pouring down, filed a claim with his cops.
We turned it around.
'Cause there's no business like small business.
Like no business we know. Wha-bam!
For gentle, dependable constipation relief, try Senecot. It works differently than other laxatives because it's made. Also available in delicious gummies.
Insurify. At Insurify, we make it easy to cut your car insurance bill in half. Half?
How? Just go to Insurify.com and compare dozens of quotes in a few clicks. You cut out the middleman so you can cut your bill in half. Go to Insurify.com and save up to 50% on your car insurance.
Spring means adventure for Shammy, but April showers mean only one thing: muddy paws. That's why her owners use Muddy Mat. It traps mud and water, it's machine washable, and it stays put. So Shammy can play and her owners stay stress-free. For clean floors and happy paws, there's Muddy Mat.
Weight loss. For so long,
I felt stuck.
I tried and tried again. Lost weight, gained it back.
But Zepbound means change. Zepbound is for adults with obesity to help lose weight and keep it off.
Activating 2 naturally occurring hormone receptors in my body, Zepbound works differently.
It's changing what I believe is possible when it comes to weight loss. It's changing how much.
A little TV here. It's Take Your Kid to Work Day. Okay, welcome to the 4th hour of Morning Joe. 6 a.m. on the West Coast, that's California, and 9 a.m. on the East Coast. Along with Jonathan Lemire and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, and MSNBC contributor Elise Jordan back with us. And joining the table, member of the New York Times editorial board, Mara Gay. We take a moment from all the news to talk about the kids. Julia and her brother Liam are here. Julia, you're kind of the spokesperson for this group here. First of all, I'm noticing jeans jackets are back in.
Very much so.
I have my mom's. I'm going to wear it again. You guys look great. Would you rather be here or in school, Julia? You're on. What's the answer? Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, good. You guys have fun today. You all can run away, okay? And I got Charlie.
Thanks
there you
for
go. Be careful,
visiting.
Charlie. All right. Bye, guys. Lemire, you take the first story. I'm having fun with the kids.
Well, I wanted to ask them about the new Fox News poll, but we'll have to do that later. We do have some brand new numbers to get to this morning as President Trump closes in on his 100th day in office. Trump just announced he plans to hold a rally in Michigan next week to mark that occasion. That new Fox News poll of registered voters finds that Trump's overall approval rating is now underwater. 44%, that's right, only 44% approve the job he's doing, while 55% disapprove. The president is also underwater on the issues of immigration, foreign policy, the economy, tariffs, and inflation. Trump receives his best marks on border security as 55% approve. Based on Trump's first 100 days, voters are now also less optimistic about the future. 38% say they feel encouraged about the next 4 years, while 51% are discouraged. Those numbers were at 45% and 84% respectively at the 100-day mark of Trump's first term back in 2017.
So a separate Reuters Ipsos poll found President Trump's overall approval rating at 42%, with 53% disapproving. Just 37% approve of his handling of the economy. Trump's worst ever rating on that question. Meanwhile, 45% approve of his handling on immigration. Meanwhile, a new Pew Research Center survey finds Trump's approval rating at 40%, with 59% disapproving. That's Trump's lowest rating on that question since 2019, and down 14 points from November. He is also underwater on tariffs at 39%, DOGE cuts at 44%, and the economy at 45%. These numbers, you would think in the White House they're taking a look today.
Yeah, I would think so. And he's at a remarkably low number here for so early in his term, rivaled only by himself in 2017. Finally, a new YouGov Economist poll found that 50% of Americans think that Kilmar Abrego Garcia should be returned to the United States from El Salvador amid his legal battle over deportation. Asked if they believe he is a member of MS-13, 27% said yes, 30% said no, and 43% said they were not sure. And Mika, certainly this issue with this one individual is representative for others. But just taking a step back here, Trump came into office boasting he had this historic mandate. We know that's not true, but he certainly came in with some political wind at his back. He won. He had a higher percentage than he did 8 years ago, and yet he has squandered a lot of his political capital already.
Well, a lot of the folks that, just anecdotally talking to Trump voters who are now suffering because of the tariffs, or going to suffer because of the tariffs, have a strange answer to it. They say, I didn't think he would do it. which I hear over and over again. Yeah, I heard what he said about the tariffs. I just didn't think he would do it. And I'm still trying to process that. I mean, that's what a campaign is about, promises, and he's following through on his promises. Joining us now, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. He's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee and has served as Senate Democratic Whip since 2005. He announced yesterday he will not be seeking re-election, and that was quite a big piece of news that came over yesterday. Senator, your thoughts this morning on your decision, especially during these turbulent times?
One of my friends in politics used to say, you should leave at a time when you still might want to stay and people might want you to stay. And I think I'm at that moment in my career. It's a personal decision to run for the Senate is a two-year undertaking. Serving in the Senate is a 6-year term. So I looked at 8 years and said, I think it's time for me to pass the torch on to another candidate.
So let's talk about the politics of the moment. And from Ukraine to tariffs, there are some things that are happening that could have pretty long-term consequences, not only on the world order, but on the U.S. economy. Can you comment, sir, on how the tariffs impact your state and what your biggest concerns are?
Devastating. That's the word I'd use. When farmers from my state depend on exports for their livelihood, and their exports are going to be the first to be undermined by any trade war that this president undertakes. I've had CEOs of major corporations who I've never spoken to before call me in my office in Washington and ask me what in the hell they're supposed to do. They have critical elements that are coming in from overseas to make products that employ thousands of people in my state, and they don't know where to turn. That uncertainty is reflected in the stock market and other places. So I would say this trade war that this president has single-handedly decided to initiate is a disaster for the economy of my state and this country.
So, Senator, Mika just mentioned Ukraine. We want to get your reaction to something we just got from President Trump a moment ago on Truth Social, saying, quote, I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. There's been a number this morning. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. President, using the president of Russia's first name there. What is your response to this, what you've seen as this peace process to this point? Yes, some stern words from President Trump today for Moscow, but to this point, his administration largely not asking Russia to give up much while asking Ukraine for a lot of concessions.
I remember the president's kind of idle claim that he needed about 24 hours to figure out this war in Ukraine. It's much more complex. And secondly, he has to understand that Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is fighting for the values which define the United States of America. This just isn't another trade war or skirmish in another country. It's so basic and fundamental. And I would say this, an appeal, and I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but we're about to bury one of the greatest popes, I think, that has served in my lifetime. Wouldn't it be significant for the world to say we're going to have a Francis Day in this world? We're going to stop the wars in Gaza. We're going to stop the war in Ukraine and the other conflicts. We're going to feed the people in Sudan, and we're going to do acts of kindness in memory of this pope. It would be, I think, significance for us to have a Francis Day around this world.
And certainly the Pope relentlessly called for an end to the fighting, both in Ukraine and Gaza. Senator, yesterday after you made your announcement that you would not be seeking re-election, there were a number of Democrats who privately really applauded your choice, saying that it was something, the right thing to do, to step aside and perhaps let a younger generation of politicians step to the forefront. We know the idea of Democratic elected officials and age has been a hot topic in recent years. Do you agree with that thinking? Do you think it is time now for younger politicians, the next generation, to come forward?
Well, I think it's more complex. It is not just a question of a number, what your age is. Look at Bernie Sanders, for God's sake, still drawing thousands and thousands of people out for rallies, and he's a few years older than I am. The bottom line is, are you competent? Can you still do the job? That's the question the voters should ask. But should a new generation be interested in public service? You bet. I've spent my time in office trying to encourage younger people to get involved.
Senator Durbin, it's Ali Vitale. I wonder if I can pick up on something you just said, this idea of, are you competent? Are you able to do this job in the Senate? As you see this push from the grassroots that Lemire is talking about here, do you think enough of your colleagues are asking themselves those fundamental questions about if they can continue to serve?
I think so. I think if you're honest about yourself and your reputation, you want to leave when you can still walk out the front door and not be carried out the back door. And I've said whatever your interest may be, whatever issue you want to focus on in Congress, in the Senate, if you stick around a couple terms, your minor is going to be aging. You can see it, you can observe it, and you have to make that choice, that decision. I've made mine.
Senator, your early endorsement of Barack Obama in 2008 is seen as a pivotal moment, not just for Barack Obama personally, but for the direction of the Democratic Party, and it was prescient in many ways. In this moment, what do you think the central question is for Democrats? And as you prepare to leave, what is your advice to them about what the coalition should look like and who should lead it in the future?
This is a different moment in history than I've read about or seen in my lifetime, for sure. This is a moment where there's a threat to the Constitution of the United States and our constitutional democracy. That is fundamental, and it's in front of every other decision of policy that we might make. We have to get it together. I will plead with my Republican friends, stand up for the Constitution. You took an oath and said you'd swear to defend this Constitution. It needs defense now more than ever with the actions by President Trump. At 100 days of this administration, the question is not whether Trump is sinking in the polling, and he appears to be, but whether his fate is going to be shared by other Republicans, and whether they have the courage to join Democrats and do the right things and stand up for the Constitution. That, to me, I think just supersedes all conversations about campaigns and even issues.
Senator Durbin, looking over your bio, I realized that you are the reason that we no longer have cigarette smoking on airplanes. And I thank you for that. That's one of many legislative achievements that you've had during your long tenure in public service. I just wanted to ask you, what are you most proud of that you did or worked on during your time in Congress?
Well, my dreamers, I introduced the DREAM Act over 20 years ago, and 830,000 individuals have now proven that I was right. They've made a dramatic contribution to this country because of the DACA program, which Barack Obama initiated. That is a source of pride. But I have to tell you, taking smoking off of airplanes changed America. It was a Malcolm Gladwell tipping point for sure. And when you look back to where we were 20 plus years ago and where we are today, it's a lot safer environment, and it's a lot healthier, and it sure is a lot more fun to ride on an airplane.
Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. Coming up on Morning Joe, we'll be joined by the Attorney General of Oregon, who is leading a coalition of states in suing the Trump administration over the president's tariffs. Also ahead, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes is our guest. He's a ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. We'll talk to him about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's use of the Signal app, plus world-renowned chef Jose Andres will be with us to discuss the impact of cuts on food programs by the Trump administration. Morning Joe is back in just a moment.
By the way, if we don't have a deal with a company or a country, we're going to set the tariff. We just set the tariff. It's something that we think that will happen, I'd say, over the next couple of weeks. Wouldn't you say? I think so. Over the next 2-3 weeks, we'll be setting the number. And we're going to pick, could be for China too, could be for China.
How soon do you want to bring the tariffs on Chinese goods
Well,
down?
that depends on them. We have a situation where we have a very, very great place. It's called the United States of America, and it's been ripped off for years and years.
President Trump saying he may revise tariffs for some trading partners in the coming weeks as the global economy still faces a lot of uncertainty over the administration's economic agenda. Meanwhile, a dozen states have filed a new lawsuit against the Trump administration over the president's sweeping tariff agenda. The states are challenging Trump's claim that he can broadly impose tariffs using emergency powers. The lawsuit claims the policies put in place by the president are unlawful and have been subject to his whims rather than sound exercise of lawful authority. The White House responded in a statement calling the legal action a witch hunt, adding, quote, the Trump administration remains committed to using its full legal authority to confront the distinct national emergencies our country is currently facing. In a moment, we're going to speak with the state attorney general, who is leading the lawsuit against the Trump administration over the president's tariffs. But first, to explain the legal basis for this fight, let's bring in former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg. So, Dave, what exactly are they arguing? Does it have legal legs, so to speak? And what do you make of the administration's reaction, especially the one about emergencies?
Yeah, a hit dog howls, Mika. There's a reason why they're pushing back so strongly. I think the attorneys general hit a nerve here. See, normally Congress has the power of the purse, including the power to tax and tariff. IHIP, that's this act that we're referring to that gives the president some special powers in an unusual and extraordinary situation when there's a threat to national security, foreign policy, or the economy of the United States. But Mika, what is the unusual and extraordinary threat here? Is it our established trading relationships? Emergency powers are supposed to exist to enable a president to respond quickly to a sudden unforeseen crisis. It's not supposed to be used. Right, it's not supposed to be used to deal with long-standing laws and policies you don't agree with. If you don't like the law, you go to Congress to change the law, even if you have a tight margin in the House. But because of those tight margins in the House and because of the filibuster in the Senate, President Trump is going a different route and invoking IHIP and doing these executive orders. And that only works until the courts shut it all down. And the reason why Trump has been able to intrude upon the powers of the legislative branch here is because Congress, for the first time in history, has emasculated itself and has cravenly ceded all of its power to the executive branch. So it's up to the judiciary now to provide the checks and balances that are crucial to our democracy.
Yeah, a couple of things, Jonathan Lemire. You know, Republicans could have done something about this, but Republicans yet again and again, and again, from Pete Hegseth to damaging tariffs that causes Wall Street to tumble and is crushing businesses across the country. And Republicans choose to say and do nothing, absolutely nothing, zero, zip, fear, just mute, zip, nothing, no action. So these attorneys generals are acting. You're going to bring one on. But another thing is calling this an emergency, self-inflicted emergency. It is creating an economic emergency, these tariffs. But I'm not sure you can declare an emergency about the emergency you are creating. But go on.
We've just seen, we've seen the reaction so far. We just went through some polls that show Americans who around the election thought Donald Trump would do a good job with the economy. Now have really soured on that.
Yeah.
Of course, day in, day out, we're seeing what's happening in the markets. And you're right, it's sort of unprecedented. Republicans control the House and the Senate, and they have ceded away power. Co-equal branch of government no longer, because they've given it to the White House. So let's now bring in Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield. He is leading the lawsuit against the Trump administration over the tariffs. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for joining us this morning. So we just got some of the legality around this, but talk to us about sort of the spirit of what you're doing here. What's the origin of this effort? What do you hope it accomplishes?
Yeah, I think what we really need to do is take it back to real people and our communities. So when you think about tariffs, right, it seems very distant from human beings. But when you look at President Trump's own research, it shows that 95% of the amount of tariffs are paid by domestic consumers. And that's all of us. And when we've looked in here in Oregon, it is a $3,800 increase for average households on everyday goods we purchase. And do not know many people that can actually afford $3,800 extra every month. And that's really the genesis of why we have to move this lawsuit forward. Not only that, it's destroying small businesses in our community. We had a pharmacy company talking about how they may have to shut down. We have people who are having their products pulled off of Canadian shelves that we're exporting. It's a massive issue, not just for people, but for businesses.
Attorney General Rayfield, Elise Jordan here. Do you see, though, you having to bring forward this case against the government over tariffs as filling the vacuum that's been left by Congress just abdicating their duty when it comes to controlling their powers over tariffs?
It's interesting. Congress did delegate some authority to the president under Title 19. The president is using these emergency powers. And remember, this is the first president in the history of our country since the enactment of IHIP that is trying to use this. He's doing it because he wants to skirt Congress. And so I do know there is some efforts in Congress to change this with some Democrats, specifically my Senator Ron Wyden. I'm not sure what the odds of them being able to do that are, which is why we are here really elevating this conversation and bringing it in court.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the legal case here and the legal framework that underpins this suit? I think what Elise is kind of getting at is, you know, we're talking about the invocation of emergency powers by the president from an emergency, as Mika said, that he created. That doesn't quite seem to justify the president acting on his own in this way. Help us understand that.
Yeah, and I think it just goes back to grade school, right? And I think President Trump has often forgotten about all the things that he learned in grade school about how government works. In our Constitution, right, and everybody agrees, Democrat, Republican, you got to follow the Constitution. We have given the power to Congress to set tariffs. Now, Congress has gone and given the president some powers to regulate tariffs under Title 19. And so what he has done, and there's specific requirements, safeguards to protect our economy in Title 19. Now, President Trump doesn't like those. And during his first administration, he actually did administer tariffs under Title 19, but he doesn't want to do that anymore. So what he's done is he's been creative and gone to this emergency power law that has never been used for tariffs to skirt Congress's intent. And that's what we're challenging. You can't do tariffs under that. You can't skirt the safeguards that Congress put in place to implement tariffs, because when you get rid of those safeguards, when you go around them, that's what hurts our businesses, that's what hurts our consumers, and effectively these are attacks on the American people.
Former State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg, you've got the next question.
Thank you, Mika. General Rayfield, I was looking through this act, IHIP, and one thing I noticed is that it gives the president these emergency powers in a crisis situation, and it lists certain sanctions you can do against hostile foreign countries. One sanction I didn't see, though, was tariffs. And so it doesn't seem to even authorize tariffs. So is this a major part of your argument that, hey, forget about the whole delegation thing with Congress. You don't have the power at all under the act to even invoke tariffs?
Absolutely. It does not list out tariffs as a possible power or a remedy under that act. Specifically, President Trump will often talk about a imbalance of trade, and so that's what we're thinking about. Trade is inequitable between different countries. Congress actually set out a specific law under Title 19 for this exact purpose, almost defining that this is not an unusual or extraordinary circumstance that you would ever use your emergency powers. They thought about it, they created a specific law, and now Trump is trying to get around that law. And that's, again, another big reason why we're bringing this lawsuit. You know what? If you want to do tariffs, that's fine. Do it the right way. Do it thoughtful when you're approaching it.
All right, Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We'll be following this. And former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg, thank you as well. And coming up on Morning Joe.
Sometimes you just need a moment. Self-care has never been this easy. Gummy vitamins from Nature Made, the #1 pharmacist recommended vitamin and supplement brand.
It all started with a small business idea.
It's a pillow with a speaker in it. That's right, Craig.
Pulling in the perfect team to get the job done.
I'm just here for the internet. AT&T, it's super fast.
You locked us out?
We had everything we needed.
Is the internet out?
Don't worry, we have AT&T Internet Backup. The next level network for small business.
I sold a pillow.
When our camera gear came down in a crash, we filed a claim with his Cox. Helped in a flash. 'Cause there's no business like small business. Wha-bam!
There are some things that work better together, like your workplace benefits and retirement savings. Voya provides tools that help you make the right investment and benefit choices so you can reach today's financial goals and look forward to a more confident future.
Voya, well planned, well invested, well protected.
With hotels and vacation rentals, Booking.com has something for everyone.
Seashells! You got anything more boutique?
Oui, right this way.
Yeah, we're talking. What about something more family friendly?
Maybe a resort with a water park?
Or somewhere less family friendly?
Yep, one Vegas hotel for the bride-to-be.
What if we hate everything?
We have free cancellation. Find exactly what you're booking for. Booking.com, Booking.com.
Are you looking for a great deal on new flooring? Don't be fooled with promises of salespeople coming into your home, where all you'll get is high prices and high-pressure sales. At Lumber Liquidators, you can shop in comfort and see the widest selection, guided by a flooring expert, so you get the right floor and a great price. From $2.94 per square foot installed. You heard right. Flooring installed for $2.94 per square foot installed. Visit lumberliquidators.com for your nearest store. Tell them Tom sent you.
Have you been curious about ED meds but don't know where to start? Hello Cake is the easy and convenient way to get ED meds shipped directly to your door, where you can consult with a doctor from the comfort of your own home to understand if Cake ED meds could be right for you. Take the first step by going to hellocake.com today.
The following is a real review of Coterie diapers from Annalise.
They are without comparison the best diapers I've ever used. My son started sleeping 10 hours the day we put Coterie on him.
Enjoy your peaceful night's sleep, Annalise.
I was never able to find a bra that fit my small chest. Every bra gave me gaps, so I designed a bra that finally fits AA to B cups perfectly. No more cup gaps or looking 2 sizes bigger. Meet Pepper. Find your perfect fit at wearpepper.com.
After Homoglow cleaned our place for $19, we fired our old housekeeper. Homoglow tackled everything from our kitchen to our bathroom, all our
interrogation.
A great wave of revolution, and David Frost was right at the front of all of that.
People standing up for what they believed in.
He was the person to be interviewed by.
You're not as dumb as you look.
He knew what television could do.
Set the date and we get out.
He was a very smart man.
Has there ever been a totally honest government?
One of the greatest interviewers of all time.
The world's most precious resource? Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi is booming.
Booming!
Boom! Wi-Fi is booming. Xfinity.
Welcome back. We turn now to Signalgate, the sequel. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly had the app installed on his desktop computer at the Pentagon. 3 people familiar with the matter tell the Washington Post that Hegseth essentially cloned the app. It's on his personal phone, enabling him to use Signal in classified spaces where his cell phone and other personal electronics are not permitted. According to the Post, Hegseth asked for the app to also be installed on his computer after a discussion about how to circumvent the lack of cell phone service in the Pentagon and therefore be able to more quickly coordinate with other top White House officials. The Pentagon's chief spokesperson tells the Post that Hegseth's communication systems are classified and that the secretary has, quote, never used and does not currently use Signal on his government computer. This report, of course, comes just days after the New York Times revealed that Hegseth sent information about Yemen attack plans in 2 different Signal groups chats last month, one of which included his wife and brother. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. He also serves on the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, good morning. Thank you for being here. We have a lot of ground to cover with you today, but let's start with the Secretary of Defense, Your concerns not just about the lack of accountability and the misuse of the personal devices, this Signal app, which is not as nearly as secure as obviously any sort of government encryption program, but also how can you then send a message to everyone else employed by the Department of Defense that classification matters?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That's the concern. I mean, we're getting 3 stories a day on the Secretary of Defense in a time of stability and peace internationally, right? And the thing that's horrifying, and I think everybody in D.C. knows this, is that the Secretary of Defense, which is arguably the hardest job in D.C., you're sitting on top of 3 million people, a sprawling bureaucracy. By the way, you do lethal stuff every single day. Pete Hegseth is just way, way out of his depths. There's, as you point out, zero accountability. Any officer who had done any of this stuff would have been retired unceremoniously. And so you're sending a message of accountability doesn't matter to a group of people who carry weapons, who drive aircraft, who are maneuvering ships in very dangerous areas. And by the way, again, no crisis, right? What happens when North Korea is fueling a nuclear missile and the president says to Pete Hegseth, what's happening and what should I do? What happens when there's a terrorist attack on one of our embassies and Pete Hegseth with his American flag, coat lining is doing rhymes in the White House? This is, again, we're not in crisis right now, but the Secretary of Defense needs to be prepared to lead and give good advice in a crisis. And Pete Hegseth can't get through a day without 3 ridiculous headlines.
And a lot of this is so basic. I mean, it doesn't take somebody who's, steeped in military, knowledge to understand that this behavior is reckless and it endangers our national security. And I think the people who might be most disturbed by it if they think it through would be anybody who is serving themselves in the military or has a family member in the military. What is this type of behavior, sort of flagrant acts of showing off and acting in a way where you're spreading information on the wrong platforms? They're now claiming it was his laptop rather than his phone. Doesn't matter. It was Signal and it was completely reckless. What does this say to members of the military and their families about their security?
It says 2 things, both of which are really dangerous. The first thing it says is that the rules don't apply to the senior-most people. And that is a pretty good way to wreck the culture of accountability, which is pretty severe inside the Pentagon. Because if you're a colonel or a 2-star general and you see the fact that something, not just something, but 6 things that would have gotten you fired fly no problem if it's the Secretary of Defense, that erodes the culture. Secondly, I mean, you said it exactly right, Mika. We don't see this in the civilian world, but the people who are actually out there and operational, the guys who are climbing into those F-35s and the F-18s to fly over Yemen, to drop ordnance on the Houthis, they get into those planes wondering, did the Secretary of Defense tell his wife? Because we know the Secretary of Defense told Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic when the planes were coming, where they were going, how the weather was, what munitions they were carrying. So for these guys who put their lives, guys and gals who put their lives at risk every single day, knowing that you've got that kind of rod at the top feels like I could die.
That's an extra burden for them with everything they carry.
Yeah, and speaking of global hotspots that we might have to be concerned about, let's turn to Ukraine. We know there's been more Russian attacks in Kyiv overnight, a number of people dead. We have heard from President Trump on Truth Social a few moments ago saying, quote, Vladimir, stop, expressing unhappiness with these attacks and using the president of Russia's first name to do so. What do you make of where things stand right now, though? Because these firm words aside, to this point, the administration has largely been adhering to Russia's wishes for the upcoming negotiations with Ukraine.
Sure. The plan they propose is not a plan. It's a total capitulation. As some diplomat said, did Putin write this peace plan? And look, Vladimir Putin is a very sophisticated guy. He sees Donald Trump and his vice president berating Zelensky in the Oval Office with cameras on. He sees us voting against Ukraine and with Russia, by the way, with North Korea and other uglies around the world, in favor of Russia. So Putin knows that Donald Trump's True Social posts don't represent what he really believes. Look, Donald Trump, I think, is a little embarrassed that he hasn't done what he promised to do, which is end this conflict in the first 24 hours of his presidency. And you also, if you sort of peel back the layers, Donald Trump is all about power, full stop. full stop. So in his mind, it's almost like a pre-World War I worldview. You know, the world is one where powerful empires, Putin, the United States, this harkens back to the French, the Austro-Hungarians, the British Empire, where they play chess with each other. And the small countries like Ukraine and Guatemala, they don't matter. They don't matter. And so he wants to get to a world where Ukraine, which, by the way, was responsible for his first impeachment, so he's got personal reasons to hate this country. He doesn't believe that these smaller countries matter. He believes he should be playing chess with Vladimir Putin, and he wants to move on to that world, even if it means sacrificing the Ukrainians.
Congress looking to budget negotiations. Elon Musk has not been able to cut as much as he had projected with his Department of Governmental Efficiency. And so when budget negotiations come around, there's still some cuts that are going to have to be made if there is going to be any decrease in the deficit. Do you predict that Republicans are going to show a willingness to make any defense cuts?
No, absolutely not. I mean, again, they have a math, pardon me, they have a math problem they can't solve, right? So they've got a massive package of tax cuts for corporations and very wealthy people. The price tag on that is many trillions of dollars. So because they still have an echo, some of them, a few of them, have an echo of fiscal responsibility, they say we need to make severe cuts. So big tax cuts, more spending on defense, where that is coming from. And by the way, this is not a Democrat talking. This is in their budget. It is coming from Medicaid. And we're at a moment where the rubber meets the road, because they've said we're going to find $880 billion, almost $1 trillion in Medicaid and waste, fraud, and abuse. That is total fantasy. They know that. But now they need to actually take that money and allocate it to cuts to accounts. And that's when the American people are going to react exactly the same way the American people reacted when their 401ks got clocked 15%, because that's very real to people. So the next couple of weeks are going to be pretty tough for the Republican majorities.
Congressman, do you believe that the Democrats have taken their case to the American people directly enough about what could be deep cuts to Medicaid that are clearly unpopular? Your Republican colleagues have been instructed not to hold town halls, I imagine in part for this reason. So in that absence, what should Democrats be doing to make clear to Americans across the country that the price for these looming tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires is going to be coming out of their pockets and out of Medicaid?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been beating that drum hard. I mean, for my own part, my guest at the State of the Union address was the head of my local community health center, who said, I may have to close with cuts this big. We're highlighting the actual people. 80 million Americans get their health insurance from Medicaid, and I think it's getting through. You know how I think it's getting through? A dozen Republicans sent a letter to the Speaker saying we will not vote for a budget bill that cuts Medicaid, and they're saying they're going to cut $1 trillion. So this is a, and by the way, we're not doing this to get partisan advantage. The kind of cuts they're talking about to Medicaid would absolutely devastate the American public, and not just the American public, but the most vulnerable members of the American public. And I think America's starting to feel that. By the way, they're also starting to say, okay, well, we trusted him on the whole tariffs thing. How'd that work out? You know, and so I'm not sure he's trusted on this issue.
I know. Again, I'm going to say it again. Everyone I talked to who voted for Trump said, I didn't think he was serious about the tariffs.
Yeah, and he wasn't. I mean, he was in the sense of doing it, but in terms of actually doing the work to figure out how to achieve a reindustrialization of coffee. There's tariffs on coffee. There is nothing we can do to grow coffee in this country, right? It just isn't going to happen. And yet we've got huge tariffs on coffee, which serves, and I could name 1,000 other products that are in that category. So look, the American people, a bunch of politicians can say a bunch of words, but when they open up their laptop and they see that their retirement account is now down 15%, doesn't matter what words a bunch of politicians say.
Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, thank you. Enjoy your coffee. You can have the mug. All right, still ahead.
No tariff.
Well, there is not a tariff here at Morning Joe.
Yeah, yes. I'd like to see St. Peter reading that. It's like, and it says here.
Secretary not going anywhere.
Secretary of Defense is doing a tremendous job, and he is bringing monumental change to the Pentagon. And there's a lot of people in this city who reject monumental change, and I think, frankly, that's why we've seen a smear campaign against the Secretary of Defense since the moment that President Trump announced his nomination before the United States Senate. Let me reiterate, the president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth in the change that he is bringing to the Pentagon, and the results that he's achieved thus far speak for themselves.
So, John, obviously he is
It's laughing this off and blaming it on someone else. For every service member, for every family member, this is an insult. to see him behaving in such a reckless way and nothing happening. Add to that, absolutely no accountability, none. Not taking any, blaming it on other people when it's obviously him. And even worse, hypocrisy. Here's Pete Hegseth, I think back in 2016, talking about others. Take a look.
Apparently, the standard operating procedure inside the Clinton Secretary of State office was to send emails that couldn't otherwise be printed to the maid to print them out of a secure area or from a secure area and then hand them off. Any security professional, military, government, or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information. The fact that she wouldn't be held accountable for this, I think, blows the mind of anyone who's held our nation's secrets dear, who's had a top secret clearance like I have and others, who know that even one hiccup causes a problem, let alone a standard procedure like this. Standard operating procedure inside the Clinton Secretary of State office was to send emails that couldn't otherwise be printed to the maid to print them out of a secure area or from a secure area and then hand them off. Any security professional, military, government, or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for any security professional, military, government, or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for any security professional, military, government, or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information.
People keep leaking. There were a series of serious leaks, and so we looked for leakers. The leakers know who they are. When we had leaks, leak investigation, leaking, leaking, leaker, leaking, leaks, leaking, leaks, leaking, leakers. Once a leaker, always a leaker. Leaking is not okay. I don't have time for leakers.
You don't have time for leakers. You are the leaker. They fired Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is getting hammered, not the way he used to. This time he's getting hammered over new bombshell revelations, literally about bombshell revelations. After the New York Times uncovered another unauthorized group chat, this one from his personal phone, in which he shared the secret and very sensitive details of a military strike with his wife, his lawyer, and his brother. His brother, turns out, is his senior advisor. Just in case you were wondering, worried there was only one unqualified Hegseth running the military, there are notified his boss, Pete Hegseth, former host of Fox and Friends Weekend, his plans for a surprise attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. About 10 minutes later, Hegseth got on his phone and excitedly texted those plans to his wife, his lawyer, and brother, not to mention the reporter who was on the other chain. There are two chains, like the rapper. And now he's in a lot of trouble. So he rushed back to his old stomping grounds, the friendly confines at Fox this morning, to make his case.
Here to set the record straight himself, the current Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth.
Oops. Somebody accidentally put the future in Brian's teleprompter. Yeah.
So, Brian, if you remember when this all started, the first go-around, because this is the second go-around, right? They peddle old stuff, they kick it back up. I said repeatedly, no one's texting war plans. You know why I said that? Because I'm in the bowels of the Pentagon every single day. Just 10 minutes ago, I was looking at actual war plans of things that were ongoing or pending things to happen.
And here they are. They're amazing. Take a look. It's pretty sick stuff right here.
What was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordination and other things. That's what I've said from the beginning.
Right, but it was bullshit from the beginning, too. It was... You texted the exact time and place the secret bombing would begin before the secret bombing happened to your wife on an easily hackable phone. And his defense for this is, who told you? And how dare they tell you? This is like your wife catching you in bed with another woman. Your response is, well, why did you come home so early? Our Secretary of Defense is defenseless, but it's not his fault. The ones who get the blame for this are the leakers.
Those very same people keep leaking. There were a series of serious leaks, and so we looked for leakers. The leakers know who they are. When we had leaks, leak investigation, leaking, leaking, leaker, leaking, leaks, leaking, leaks, leaking, leakers. Once a leaker, always a leaker. Leaking is not okay. I don't have time for leakers.
You don't have time for leakers. You are the leaker. one who leaked this. You leak so much, you should be wearing Depends to work. And then to make this even more fascinating, we have this.
If the Nuggets cannot win one of this next couple games, this year is going to be quick.
You can't underestimate the other thing about Kawhi is, you know,
You all right, big fella?
You know, catching a cramp.
Go ahead, keep talking, Chuck. Yeah, we're on TV.
We're potty training. He's got.
Go ahead, keep talking, Chuck. Yeah, we're on TV.
I know, go ahead. Yeah, that's that olive oil you've been drinking.
Oh, no. Hey, take some matches with you.
Hey, listen, he couldn't hold it. After 40, he can't hold it.
That's his first.
Another leaker. From the Lakers. A Laker leaker.
Elon Musk gave these back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. You see it there. Elon Musk has not directly addressed this, but he has appeared to edit out that gesture from the video that he posted on X, the platform he, of course, owns. Help us understand what transpired.
Oh, careful. Careful with that salute.
It's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
That's what a Nazi would say.
Identity of the various countries. Or they simply will not be those countries.
Aber der ist wahrscheinlich für Sie auch Nazi, No, dog. No, this is the Charlie Chaplin mustache.
And then they say he's a Nazi.
And given that another news report came out this week claiming Trump said Hitler did some good things too, that's not as far-fetched a question as those who want to hold their nose and vote for Trump would like to admit. Earlier, the Nazi leader was focusing on a perceived enemy within instead, namely the Jews. Given that we now know the was commencing, this makes for poignant reading. And you don't have to go much further from there to connect the horrors of the Third Reich to the promises and the lies of the Trump campaign. The lies he repeated during the presidential debate about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, painting them as monsters, was compared by multiple outlets to the blood libel, the age-old conspiracy theory that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make matzah, the textbook anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and on its face, a ludicrous smear. So too are these lies about Haitians. Although I don't quite feel comfortable drawing a direct line here for reasons of, well, history, and also because animals and babies, they're two different things. The spirit, however, is there, and the smears work in the same way. People who are already primed to hate the target of the smear will use it to justify and intensify their pre-existing disgust, and will push them from irritation and harsh words closer to outright violence. Those who recognize it rightly as a falsehood dismiss it as ridiculous, because it is. But it is important that we recognize that it is as dangerous as it is false. This is an important tool in radicalizing the people that Trump needs to get his violent work done.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You don't need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets. And since the Haitian Revolution, Americans have often treated painting them as monsters, was compared by multiple outlets to the blood libel, the age-old conspiracy theory that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make matzah, the textbook anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and on its face, a ludicrous smear. So too are these lies about Haitians.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You don't need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets. You need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets.
In Gaza, the Palestinian Ministry of Health reports Israeli attacks killed 50 people and wounded more than 150 others over the past 24 hours. Among the dead are 3 Palestinians who were killed when an Israeli drone struck a food distribution center in central Gaza. On Wednesday, Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir claimed during a visit to the U.S. that top Republican lawmakers support the policy of bombing food and humanitarian aid depots in Gaza. After he was feted at a dinner in his honor Tuesday evening at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, Ben-Gvir wrote of the Republicans, quote, "They express support for my very clear position on how to act in Gaza and that the food and aid depots should be bombed in order to create military and political pressure to bring our hostages home safely," Ben-Gvir wrote in remarks translated from Hebrew. Separately, Ben-Gvir was confronted by student protesters and others on Wednesday after attending an event near Yale University. This all comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returned to a Tel Aviv courtroom this week to give testimony as he faces 3 separate corruption cases. Netanyahu is charged with fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes. Authorities in Indian-administered Kashmir say they've identified 3 suspects in Tuesday's deadly assault on tourists in the resort town of Pahalgam, which killed 26 people and injured more than a dozen others, most of them Indian nationals. 2 of the 3 suspects are Pakistanis. In the wake of the attack, India closed its main border with Pakistan and canceled visas for Pakistani visitors, ordering them to leave India within 48 hours. India also canceled a landmark water treaty with Pakistan and summoned Pakistan's top diplomat to New Delhi amidst growing tensions between the nuclear-armed neighbors. Overnight, Russian missile attacks killed at least 8 people in Kyiv in Russia's deadliest strikes on Ukraine's capital since last summer. Dozens of others were wounded. The attack came as the Trump administration's been threatening to withdraw from peace talks. On Wednesday, Trump demanded Kyiv accept a plan that would allow Russia to maintain territory it's gained during its 3-year-long invasion of Ukraine and barring NATO membership for Kyiv. The plan has been rejected by President Volodymyr Zelensky. The federal judge overseeing the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father who was sent to a prison in El Salvador after an administrative error, granted the Trump administration an additional week to share what steps it's taking to ensure his return. Meanwhile, Abrego Garcia's wife had to be moved to a safe house after the Department of Homeland Security posted her address online, sharing a photo of a 2021 protective order that featured her home address. Federal immigration agents in Florida have opened Operation Tidal Wave, a first-of-its-kind coordinated effort with state police that's seeking to arrest 800 undocumented immigrants this week. Some 230 Florida law enforcement agencies have signed on to an initiative that allows ICE to deputize officers to act as immigration agents. In Vermont, agents with U.S. Customs and Border Protection raided the state's largest dairy farm on Monday, arresting 8 immigrant workers who've since been jailed at the Northwest State Correctional Facility. It's the largest immigration enforcement action in Vermont's recent history. The Republican Governor Phil Scott responded to the raid by calling on Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform, writing in a statement, quote, "Migrant workers are an essential part of our communities. They are our neighbors and friends, have kids in our schools, shop at our businesses, and play an important role in our economy and workforce," Governor Scott said. In Southern California, the Department of Homeland Security says its agents arrested 10 people at a raid on day laborers gathered outside a Home Depot store in Pomona Tuesday morning. This comes as advocates are raising alarm over the targeting of Southeast Asian immigrants in Los Angeles and Orange County. In the months since Trump returned to office, ICE has detained a growing number of Cambodian, Laotian, and Vietnamese immigrants, even though their deportation orders had been placed on indefinite hold, sometimes for several decades. Here in New York, immigrant delivery workers rallied outside the headquarters of DoorDash Wednesday to demand the food delivery app cease its predatory labor practices, including wage theft. The protest was organized by Los Deliveristas Unidas. This is Santos Suk, a 25-year-old delivery worker who's owed nearly $2,000 in wages by DoorDash dating back to 2022.
It's not fair that they steal our wages. We want to work. We have families in our home countries, and our wages help support our families. We are here to demand justice from DoorDash. They are multimillionaires, and it's unacceptable that they owe us money. We face many risks. People think our work is easy. It's not. We risk our lives in the snow, in the rain, in the heat, in traffic. My message to my fellow immigrants is, do not be afraid. We have to keep going. We are here to fight.
Earlier this year, DoorDash was ordered to pay nearly $17 million for unlawfully using customer tips to subsidize the wages of its delivery workers. A dozen states, including New York and Oregon, have sued President Trump over his, quote, arbitrary imposed tariffs on Wednesday, arguing such decisions must be made by Congress. This comes a week after California launched its own tariff lawsuit. On Wednesday, President Trump suggested he could reimpose what he called reciprocal tariffs on some countries in 2 to 3 weeks if they fail to make a deal with him soon. Share prices of President Trump's meme coins surged by over 50% Wednesday after the cryptocurrency's website announced its top 220 investors would be invited to attend a private gala dinner hosted by Trump. The promotion also offers a, quote, ultra-exclusive VIP reception with the president and a White House tour for the top 25 Trump meme coin investors. The anti-corruption group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, known as CREW, called the promotion, quote, one of the most blatant and appalling instances of selling access to the presidency we've ever seen, unquote. The European Union fined Apple and Meta $800 million for violating the Digital Markets Act, a new law designed to prevent anti-competitive practices by big tech. Meta is accused of forcing users to either pay for Facebook and Instagram subscriptions or to make their personal data available to advertisers. Trump has threatened to retaliate against European regulations on U.S. tech companies. Prosecutors and defense attorneys made opening statements Wednesday in a retrial of Harvey Weinstein on rape charges. The disgraced movie mogul was convicted of rape in 2020, but that landmark ruling was later overturned due to a judge's error. This time around, the case will be heard by a majority female jury. This trial will also feature a newly added allegation by former model Kaya Sokolow, who accuses Weinstein of forcing oral sex on her in 2006. Sokolow's attorney spoke to reporters after Wednesday's opening arguments here in New York.
The Me Too movement is alive and well. There's been incredible changes in legislation surrounding sexual assault. I think as a society, we are starting to have a better collective understanding about the trauma that sexual assault survivors have faced. And we are able to differentiate these rape myths and the victim blaming, which is a tactic that Weinstein's lawyers have used in this trial.
In media news, the long-standing executive producer of CBS's 60 Minutes has quit. Bill Owens wrote in a memo to his staff, quote, "It has become clear that I would not be allowed to run the show as I have always run it, to make independent decisions based on what was right for 60 Minutes, right for the audience," he said. Trump is suing CBS for $20 billion over a segment last year he said was edited to be favorable to Kamala Harris. It was an interview with her they edited down. In January, the New York Times reported CBS's parent company, Paramount, could reach a settlement with Trump in that case. Trump has also called for CBS to lose its broadcasting license after airing pieces on Ukraine and Greenland he disagreed with. Meanwhile, a planned $8 billion merger between Paramount and Skydance Media is currently awaiting FCC approval. Skydance's CEO, David Ellison, is the son of billionaire Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle and a close Trump ally. In Michigan, FBI agents and local police raided the homes of University of Michigan Palestinian rights activists in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Canton on Wednesday. The targets of the raids participated in campus anti-war protests. Attorney General Dana Nessel claims they're part of a vandalism investigation. Rights groups condemned the raids, with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, asserting, quote, peaceful dissent is not a crime, unquote. In California, a group of students at Occidental College are entering their 4th day of a hunger strike to demand Occidental divest from companies tied to Israel's slaughter in Gaza, protect free speech on campus, and shield students from attacks by ICE and the LAPD. These are some of the striking students speaking Wednesday.
Today marks day 3 of our hunger strike and day 564 of Israel's most recent intensification of the 77-year genocide against the Palestinian people. Since March, Israel has been enforcing a man-made blockade and creating a famine.
Occidental College is complicit in this ongoing genocide, and we as the students are committed to holding the administration accountable to being on the right side of history.
In more higher education news, colleges belonging to what's known as the Big Ten Alliance are establishing a mutual defense compact to fight back against Trump's escalating legal, financial, and political attacks on universities. Those who already voted to sign on to the pact include Rutgers and University of Michigan. The Washington Post reports the Trump administration is preparing to remove federal protections for at least 6 national monuments spanning millions of acres of land across Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Utah. This comes as the Interior Department is moving to fast-track approvals for coal, gas, oil, and mineral projects on public lands and waters, reducing the typical length of an environmental review to just 14 or 28 weeks, down from 1 to 2 years. The Trump administration is justifying the change by its declaration of a so-called energy emergency. Environmental groups have vowed to sue to block the move. A new report by the American Lung Association finds nearly half of people in the U.S. are breathing in dangerous levels of air pollutants. Scientists say larger and more frequent wildfires triggered by the climate crisis have contributed to the nation's worsening air quality crisis. And in more environmental news, the worst ever recorded event of coral bleaching has spread to 84% of the world's reefs. The bleaching, brought about by global heating, seriously threatens oceanic biodiversity and could lead to the death of vital underwater ecosystems. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!